Are we good? Okay. All right. Here we go. Thank you for those of you watching downstream from us. And we are talking today here at the Port Townsend Adventist Church. We're going to be talking about the origin of oceans. In particular, we'll be talking about the flood. And what I'm going to start off with is a prayer. So let's bow our heads. For Heavenly Father, we are so glad to be here, and we thank you that we can study something as important and critical in the history of this planet as the flood, the great flood of Genesis. We know it was a painful day for you and for the universe to watch, but there are lessons for us to learn. Thank you for the evidence left behind, and we thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen. We'll start off with a little bit of a complaint I'm going to address toward those of you in the audience that may have done the following thing. Have any of you ever given to a grandchild or a child a toy or a puzzle or a coloring book or something that depicts the flood with a happy Noah and happy little giraffes and elephants and everyone into a lovely little boat where there seems to have been nothing but joy on a beautiful day? Have anybody here guilty of such a thing? Okay, well, okay, I'll let it go this time. If you're trying to say to your children, your grandchildren, God will provide a way of safety through the most difficult times, yes, he will do that, no question. I'll give you a pass. But to depict the flood in fairy tale type pictures is a disservice, I think, to, frankly, the painful event that it really was. It was a horrific, a Holocaust times 1,000 sort of experience that this universe was aghast at seeing, I'm sure. So anyway, having said all of that and getting your attention a little bit, let's talk about the flood. First of all, what led up to the flood? The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. Makes you think a little bit about today. So God looked upon the earth, and indeed it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Now please notice the language there is very inclusive to include animals as well as people. All flesh, all flesh, all flesh. So it's clear that not just humankind was out of control violent, the animal kingdom also was a concern for God. So the Bible says that the ark, we'll talk about it in a minute, came down in the mountains, plural, of Ararat in the original Hebrew, mountains, plural. So some region around Mount Ararat, now there it is there. Now I got to set up a little bit of a search for the ark with a little bit of history here. How many of you remember, and I'm looking around, there's enough white hair here, I think, to get a positive on this. How many of you remember the Cold War? Okay, you remember the Cold War? I do too. I grew up in Los Angeles. We're all worried about the Russians. And when we'd have an air raid siren at the local elementary school where I was going, public school, the siren would go off and we were all to scurry under the desks because if the Russians had dropped an atomic bomb, you would be safe there. So anyway, you remember all those days? Anyway, guess what? Mount Ararat is right on pretty close to the border with Russia. And the Turks also were worried about Russians, and the Russians were watching very carefully the Turks and everybody else in the West. And so the Turks did not need, for years, not need to have a group of absent-minded Americans or anyone else running around on the slopes of Ararat, being watched through the sniper scopes of the guards on the Russian border, just itching for some kind of border incident to get out of control. So what did they do? They tended to keep people away from Mount Ararat. Now, what happens when anyone, any government tries to keep people from doing something? Yeah. Well, what are they hiding? What are the Muslim government hiding from Christians, or whatever? So there's sort of these kind of theories going on. In fact, now things are a little nicer with Russia and East-West and all that, and so now the Turks aren't quite so worried. In fact, they've got Ark visitor centers there. So y'all come and bring your dollars, and y'all come and help us look for the ark. And so they've got places, they're ready for visitors to come over, and there's no problem now. Now, take a look at this picture. You can see there's a lot of open spaces here. I've done some research and studied what others have researched on the subject of looking for the ark. The most conservative, ark-believing, no problem with the ark being up in Mount Ararat agencies that I can think of, but that have reasonable, good scientists doing work, have concluded that the ark is not up there, or has not been found. I know about the theories, and I know about what you've heard. I've heard them too. But let's lay down a couple of things. Number one, we have satellite imagery now that is unbelievable. Satellites can take pictures of people reading newspapers and can tell you what the headlines say. With that quality. And whatever you think about global warming or global climate change or whatever, there's no question that the snow is pulled back a little and more is being revealed. And there's no ark up there. And we've run down the stories, the many stories of where we think it was up this gulch or over here. They've all been checked out, and there is no ark up there. And I have no problem with that. I have no problem at all, because I don't think, well, I've got a theory. It's a good theory because you can't disprove it. I think that when Noah and his family got off the ark and they looked around, they couldn't see any Lowe's. There weren't any Home Depots. There weren't even Walmarts. And there certainly weren't forests around. And I think they looked around and they were nothing to build with, to make anything with. And I think they just turned around and looked at the ark and say, okay, let's start taking it apart. That makes sense to me. That's logical. And that is what ancient people did. They did a lot of recycling. I could show you pictures of ruins, ancient ruins, where what's left of the buildings are columns and arches, because they didn't know how to reuse those. But all the regular rectangular rocks or stones are taken away and reused. So they reuse things. Anyway, like I say, it's a good theory, because try to disprove it. Anyway, but the point is, we do know where the ark is today. It's in northern Kentucky. And there it is a few summers ago when they had the opening day at the Ark Experience done by Answers in Genesis, which is the world's largest non-denominational creation ministry. They have a very famous museum back there as well, very, very worth looking at. And you ought to put this on your bucket list, because this is something to see at least once. I know Northern Kentucky rates high on that vacation list, but yeah, try to fit this in. It's really interesting. It is the world's largest wooden structure. Cost $100 million to build. If you've ever worked homework, doing woodworking in your shops at home, you would really appreciate the work they did here, because they tried to do as much as they could using old technology and old ways of doing things. So there's 3 decks there. The bottom deck has animals in cages. I put animals, they're stuffed, not real animals, in cages with animal sounds, and hundreds of those. Then the next deck has got storage, jars and bags, and human living quarters. Then the top deck, which is one I really wanted to see, because we were setting up our museum in Ridgefield, and I wanted to see what ideas they had in presenting their science. And they had science exhibits, the front part of the ark, very good ones, none of them over the top. They were all good and solid and not overly stated. And then the back of the ark was a following of, or the story of, salvation from Adam and Eve's sin all the way to the second coming. Beautifully done. And I don't know, if you get a chance to go back there, it's worth it, I think. Expect to pay a few dollars to get in, but it's worth it. So anyway, now if I'm a Bible skeptic and I believe that, don't have a whole lot of faith in Moses and God writing through Moses and all that, and I happen to know that the Babylonian version of the flood, the Gilgamesh epic, exists in cuneiform form a full 6 centuries before Moses wrote, I would say, okay, the Hebrew story is just a Hebrew version of a Babylonian myth, They just copied a few things and added a few things. Well, guess what? Babylonians weren't the only ones that had flood stories. Are you ready for this? Here we go. Take a look. Let's go through the Middle East for a minute, and those cultures back there, Babylonians, Egyptians, the Assyrians, these all had flood stories. Let's go to Europe. The Romans and the Greeks had the date pretty close to the Bible date as well. Let's go to Africa. These are all pre-missionary stories that they had before missionaries came in contact with them. Even the Pygmies had one. Let's go to Asia. These are other sources that had flood stories in their ancient memories. Let's go to the South Pacific. Now, when it says Australia, that means the Aborigines. The Maori, even the Hawaiians have a flood story. Let's go to the Americas now, South and Central and North America. All these Indian tribes, both young and old in terms of what you think of, ancient, like Inca and Toltec, as well as Eskimos, for goodness sakes, have flood stories. I went to the Smithsonian Institution Museum on Native American History. Did you know there was one? Native American History. And the interior of the building is shaped like a teepee, kind of, and you just go up and up and up to the very top, which is where the oldest stuff on display was. And I was there looking when a Native American woman came with a tour group. She was their guide, and she's leading them around and telling them about the displays. And she said, my people, to the group, my people, and she's talking about her tribe, have a flood story. You people do too, right? And she paused. Maybe there's something to it. And I thought, in the Smithsonian Institution too, way to go. Only Native American could probably say that and get away with it. But anyway, and still be employed. But anyway, pretty cool, pretty cool. So those flood stories have a lot of similarities. Usually it's something like this. The gods were angry with man and decided to wipe them out. But somebody cleverly escaped the destruction and from them repopulated the world. There's a lot of similarities. The difference is the biblical story has a big difference. God has grace and tries to save those who want to be saved. That's a huge story difference. So anyway, let's talk about how much water we got. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. It sounds like planet Earth starts with all water, doesn't it? There is a lot of water on this planet, and I say that as we can look down and look at some of it out the window. If you were to take the earth and smooth the mountains off, use them to fill in the valleys and make the world as smooth as a marble, there would be 5,000 feet of water and completely around the globe. We got plenty of water. I was telling some people, a few years ago, there was a race on among some governments to see who could drill the deepest drill in the world, to see how far you could get down into the crust. I think the Russians won that, and I think it was something like 45 or 48,000 feet deep they got in, I think, Siberia. Anyway, they got down that deep, they found water down there. They did not expect to find water that deep. Point is, there's a lot of water on and below the surface of the earth. So, for years in Western science, the thought of what we're looking at when we're looking at all the mountains around us were remnants of the flood. We could see the last actions of the flood on the mountains around us. On that day, all the fountains of the great deep were opened up. Incidentally, fountains can mean volcanic fountains because the word doesn't mean water so much as jets coming up. This was a standard understanding of the Earth's history for centuries in Western thought. It was just accepted. But then things changed in some of the great universities in Europe, and it was the rise of secular humanism, which is a nicer way of saying atheism, and the decline of Christianity. So secular humanism, the thought that man is all there is and at the top of the chain kind of thing, versus the decline of Christianity. And it's very accurate to describe Europe now as post-Christian, which is sad. I'll leave it to you to think about how America's doing. That'll be for another discussion. But James Hudson, for instance, proposed, and he's a father of modern geology, he proposed the idea of uniformitarianism as we look at the mountains around us. Now, it sounds like a church, doesn't it? I'm a member of the Church of First Church of Uniformitarianists, And that is simply that the thought is that the Earth's surface has been shaped by forces at a uniform rate, whether it's wind or rain or whatever. Everything's been going on roughly the same way for as far back as we know. And definitely not a flood, which would be a catastrophism position. Uniformitarian, uniform rates. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about. Let's look at the Grand Canyon and the Colorado River. So measure at the base of where the Colorado River empties into Baja California, the Gulf of California between Baja and Mexico. Measure how much dirt comes out in 1 year, okay? How much is missing in the Grand Canyon? Do the math, done. That's how old the Grand Canyon is, end of question. So, that's it. And that's the idea. Incidentally, all dating of anything in science is based on this idea. Rates remain the same. Rates remain the same. Tree rings remain the same. Layers of snow and ice and layers remain the same in terms of how fast they're made. So that's the key to understanding how they get millions of years and everything else. This became the standard understanding of the Earth's history for centuries, and that is uniformitarian thinking. Until some guy from UW came along named J. Harlan Bretz, a geologist who went to Dry Falls. Anybody here ever been to Dry Falls? Dry Falls in the Grand Coulee area, kind of, north central Washington. He went to Dry Falls. There's a picture at the top on the right of Dry Falls. It's called Dry Falls because it looks like a waterfall like Niagara Falls with the water turned off. It's true there's water down below, but those are just collected. They're not from a waterfall. And J. Harlan Bretz went there and says, wait a minute, this looks like something happened in the past that's not going on now, which is a no-no in science. So everything continues at the same rate, uniformly. He said, well, something happened here in the past. He started talking about it with geologists in America, and they said, nah, we are not into that. We're not into floods. Besides, where'd the water come from? Okay. Went up the Clark Fork River into what is now known as Missoula, Montana. And if you go to Missoula, Montana, and you look at the mountains all around Missoula, you can see shorelines as sure as anything. There's a shoreline, there's one, there's one, there's one. There used to be water filling up Missoula, Montana. So he did his research and he came up with the following idea that at some time in the past, we would call in the Ice Age, I'll talk about the Ice Age in a minute, ice blocked the Clark Fork River, blocked it off, and started a lake, a serious lake to be formed in the back, upstream. And so, let's see if I got that picture up. There it is, there's the dam, ice dam, and made a body of water the size of Lake Erie, okay? One of the Great Lakes. And then, at some point in the past, that ice dam broke and the water came out of there with the force of, unbelievable water force, emptying that lake in 1 to 2 days. Think of the power that came over the Dry Falls, went right through Spokane, and I used to live in Spokane, and so when Cindy and I, when we try to plant a plant on the side of this hill we lived on, put a shovel in the ground and you'd keep getting river rock, potato rocks. There was no creek, no river, nothing around there, anything like that. So no source of water, all of these rocks were that way in a soft, sandy kind of soil. It was from this that came through some centuries before. Went all the way down the Columbia River Gorge, widened the gorge out, and actually did a little carving in the ocean bed at the mouth of the river as well. So, and some of the water spilled into Willamette Valley, which is one of the reasons why Willamette Valley looks the way it does today, nice and flat and, fertile. Anyway, so he shared all this information, he even took pictures of giant ripple marks from the air, and presented all of this to the geologists of America over a period of 40 years. And finally, he got a couple of them to go out to Dry Falls and take a look for themselves. And they contacted Harlan and they said this, okay, Harlan, we're now catastrophists. You're right, something happened here, a major water event. Now, he was still alive. He was an old man by the time they accepted his views on this. It's called the Missoula Flood, if you've ever heard of it. But you know what he said after that? He said, now we need to look at the Grand Canyon. Because the Grand Canyon gives lots of evidence of being formed rapidly. Okay, now having said that, let's go to something that some of you here can relate to, because I see, like me, you have a couple of those white things growing out of your head, and let's take a look. Where were you on the day? 40 years ago, a little bit more, May 18, 1980, a Sunday morning. Where were you when Mount St. Helens blew 1,300 feet off in a matter of a few seconds?
I was having breakfast in my kitchen.
Okay. Did you hear anything?
Yeah.
You heard a sound?
Yeah.
Okay.
Where were you?
Marrowstone Island.
I was on Marrowstone Island too, and we heard and felt it.
Okay, you heard and felt it.
My window shake in the house, and I thought something was blowing up on Indian Island.
Wow. You know, the people that are on the north side, which is up here, felt it and heard it much better than the ones on the south. I've had people tell me in Portland they didn't hear it, and that's on the south. But it was the north side that blew. So anyway, it kind of makes sense somehow. So yeah, here we go. And this is all going to be important for our talk. I want you to think, and I told the kids this, same illustration I gave the kids at the school, I think. Think of volcanoes as in a couple of ways. Volcanoes are a lot of fun. I love volcanoes. That sounds stupid, doesn't it? They're a lot of fun.
I get it.
Greg gets it. Greg understands me. Okay. Otherwise, I want to apologize to those watching at home right now for a silly thing that I said. But anyway, okay. Think of volcanoes as a bump in the ground. Something's trying to get out from underneath, gas, lava, something's trying to push up and make it, and they make a mountain, okay? Think of a couple of types. One would be a kind that has a cap on it, that has cracks or openings in it. So as the lava is coming up, it finds an easy way to flow out. There's no problem, no pressure, and just flows out. Now that's Hawaii, okay? And that's where the stuff flows down into the ocean and makes more Hawaii. Good. Okay, so, but there's other kinds that are like solid caps. They're corks on the bottle, and that's Mount St. Helens. And so as the pressure of the gases were building, it pushed out the north face a little bit each day. Started to push it out toward the end. It was 5 feet a day, and push it out and push it out. And finally, a little tremor happened, and the north face broke off and slid down. When it slid down, that was a cork off the bottle, and boom, out it came. And that's what you're seeing there. You can see in this first picture on the upper left, you can see that little flat part that's coming down. That used to be higher up. That's now broken free and is sliding down. And as that's sliding down, all the pressure is released, and boom, out it comes. Very powerful eruption. I want to say something like 57 or 55, not sure which, 56, somewhere right in there, people died from that eruption. About 6 of them were in areas designated as unsafe because they were there with permission studying. The others were killed in areas considered safe because the eruption was so much larger than what they thought it was going to be. But what did we learn from Mount St. Helens eruption? We found out that a catastrophe can make a Grand Canyon real quick. We have this little Grand Canyon down a North Fork of the Toutle River coming down below the summit there. And if you take a look at these strata, these lines of rock, all of this was laid down at the time of the eruptions. And you can see, yeah, let's do that again. You can see those lines in there. Now that's rock that was graded out, but it's also actually become solid. The whole cliffs there have become more solid. And you can see that the water that came down and the snow and ice that came from the melting of the volcanic action came down and washed out that area and made a canyon. So canyon with layers makes you think of places like this or even like this. Look at those layers. Now, you tell me, what can you imagine that would produce perfect layers like that? Especially layers that some of them are the size of states. how, what's the source? How do you get so nice and flat and one on top of the other? Now, let's, oh, and look at this. Where's this?
Monument Valley.
Monument Valley, and this is on the Utah-Arizona border and near the Colorado border in Four Corners. But take a look at this place. This is amazing to me. Now, you can imagine that right along the top there used to be the top of the ground, no question. And yet, where did all of this stuff go? And it's not down below there. It's not even the same zip code.
Downstream.
It's way downstream, way down area. In fact, what's interesting is the stuff that's in the Grand Canyon, they tried to find what used to be in the Grand Canyon, and guess where it isn't? It isn't in the Gulf of California where the Colorado River empties out. It should be easy to find there. Some is there, of course, but not as much to allow for the whole canyon. And so they've been looking for it, and the last I've heard, at least some people think it's in the Mojave Desert in California that it got out there. That's interesting. But anyway, the point is this, and even evolutionists agree, okay, what happened here must have been some kind of a large water event, because there's nothing that can move that much material. We're talking about cubic miles of material and many, many hundreds of miles to move it away. What does it take to move it? It's going to take a lot of water, big action. So in a creation world, and those who believe in the flood, this would be caused by what we would call a drainage event. A drainage event. So water was pooled at one point, then broke free and took with it probably very soft layers of rock, easier to move. So when the layers are soft, what can you do with them? Well, you can bend them too. Sometimes some people think that this happened over millions of years, but if the layers were solid and flat and then bent, they usually be more breaking, but you see real bending, and that would have been easier to do when it was soft. So really the question, what's that? It just came down. Anyway, oh, you don't see it, it's back there. Okay, good. One of the great things to do in science is to ask a question that you're going to get an answer to. You're trying to answer a question. If you got a good question, the chances are the science is going to be better. Here's a really good question. When we look at the crust of the earth, we know water's involved. What answers better the question of how it happened, how it looks the way it does? With much water over little time or little water over much time? And that's a really good question. So it depends upon how you interpret things, what kind of glasses you're looking through. Are you open to catastrophism as a partial answer, or is it strictly uniformitarian? So, okay, class, we're back in school. Greg is here teaching, and Greg, you can address the class if you want. What are the 3 basic types of rocks? Come on now.
Somebody said sedimentary.
Sedimentary. Let's talk. How did you say it again? Sedimentary? Sedimentary. Sedimentary.
Elementary.
Yeah. Sedimentary. Let's go with the first kind. Sediments what it's made of. Sediments, little bits and pieces. Limestone, sandstone, shale, coal. Salt is a sedimentary rock. When you sprinkle salt on your French fries, you are shaking rocks onto it. Did you know that? The good news is it's water soluble. But anyway, okay, anyway. And so sedimentary rock is a good way to think of sedimentary rock is the following way. Think of destroyed rock. Rock that was completely blown apart into a bazillion pieces, and those little pieces got mixed together and cemented into sedimentary rock. So whatever it used to be is not anymore, but now it's sedimentary rock. That's a good way to look at it. Number 2 is igneous rock. Think of ignite as hot. Yeah, this is rock that cooled from a liquid state. Basalt was what's basalt called in a liquid state? Lava. That's lava. Lava hardens and becomes basalt. Now, metamorphic rock are the first 2 kinds of rocks cooked into something else. So sedimentary rock, interestingly, is most of the rock in the planet is sedimentary rock. 3 out of 4 rocks are sedimentary rock, and you usually need water to make it. And so does that tell you something about the crust of the earth and what we're looking at? I mean, look at the Grand Canyon. That is all sedimentary rock, with just a little bit of lava thrown in. Sedimentary rock is Amazing. Okay, now, so what is the evolutionist Bible? It is a geologic column because that has in its layers the inerrant record of the Earth's history. And I agree with that, but how you interpret those inerrant records is very important. Now take a look at the table next to it. It has, for instance, millions of years supposedly on the left column. That's all millions of years. On the right column, you see Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic eras, and that's based on life. So recent life, middle life, early life. And then all these other periods in between, there are other layers of fossils and so on. Let's talk about that in just a minute. But notice what happens. Life appears in the fossil record right there on that Precambrian, Cambrian break at about 570 or up to maybe 600 million years ago, give or take a few million. What's that among friends, right? Years. But interestingly, 32 out of 35 phyla, which are varieties of critters, show up immediately at the very bottom of the fossil record. That is an interesting one, including such things as trilobites. Have you ever heard of trilobites? There are society of trilobite nerds. They are out there. They love trilobites. Trilobites are a critter that lived around the water's edge, and they were anywhere from this big to this big in size. And there were many varieties of them, and they are all extinct. But trilobites were water dwellers, and it makes sense in a flood scenario they'd be the first things in the record because they were right by the edge of the water, not very mobile, they'd be covered up first. But trilobites, their eyes are really interesting because a variety of trilobites have a variety of eyes, including eyes not terribly unlike ours. They have some that are with fish eyes, some with insect eyes, some with eyes on poles. You know, looking around. Eyes are very hard to explain from an evolutionary standpoint. How do you get an eye in the first place? Very complicated. They imagine that originally some animal had something like a light-sensitive patch on their outside of their body, and they somehow are able to orient toward light. You know, there's light over there. Yeah. All right. Now that somehow, that little white light patch somehow evolved into a focusing, yeah, you get the idea. Somehow or other got to the kind of eyes that we have now. But to have the different variety of eyes and all there immediately in the fossil record is a hard one to explain. But talking about the different varieties, period, scientists commonly refer to this abrupt transition as a Cambrian explosion. Depending on the classification scheme used, about 30 to 40 or more animal phyla, which is the major kinds of animals, appear in this part of the geologic column. Notice what he says now. Few or no new basic types show up above this level. This sudden appearance challenges any idea of a long, gradual evolutionary process. Now, if there's no other science quotes you get today, either this morning or this afternoon, that you keep up here, please try to keep this one. This is key. Stephen Jay Gould, I call this the Pope of Evolution because he was on every television program, PBS, Nova, Science, you know, Nature, everything, because on the subject of evolution, where we came from, because he was articulate, he was funny, he gave good, quick answers, he was perfect to speak on behalf of evolution. A Harvard-trained biologist on the Harvard staff, Stephen Jay Gould, said this, and boy, this is important. The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record persists as a trade secret in paleontology. What's a trade secret? Do you tell outside your group of peers? Do you go to the press with that? No, you just talk to your buddies and you're saying, boy, we got a secret here. Let's not talk too much about this just anywhere. What's the problem that we have as evolutionists? The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil record. Transitional, meaning from one kind of animal evolving into another kind. We don't have any of those. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches The rest is inference, not the evidence of fossils. What did he say? He said, we're guessing, we're guessing, we're inferring. We don't have, we just assume that they transitioned or moved or evolved into another form. But yeah, so what is he saying? Let me show you on this tree then. So there's the tree of life, right? Evolution, and this is supposedly how everything evolved. What is he saying? He's saying, watch the little green circles. The little green circles are where we have fossil evidence. We've got monkeys, we've got lemurs, we've got, dinosaurs and frogs and horses and all of that. We got all those. You know what? The ones we don't have any of? The ones right along there. They're in the red. We don't have any of those. We don't have any pre-frogs, pre-horses, pre-anythings. And that's a little secret we ought to keep to ourselves, right, guys? Yes, okay, let's keep that to ourselves. Because we want the people to believe that we got this absolutely slam dunk and proven. So, okay. In case you're wondering, Darwin knew all about this problem. You've heard of missing links? This is missing chains. Darwin knew all about this problem and complained about it, but said, I predict that more fossils will be found. And guess what? They were found. Look what they say now. This is an evolutionist. We are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. Yay, woohoo, we got more fossils. We now have 250,000 fossil species, but we got new species, but the situation hasn't changed much. We have even what? Fewer examples of evolutionary transition than we had in Darwin's time. What does that mean? That means the ones that look promising, like horse evolution. We thought we had that little bitty horse with the multiple hooves and growing eventually into losing hooves on the way, toes, and moving up into a single-toed, single-hoofed, big horse. We thought we had that all nice and done. You've seen the pictures in evolutionary textbooks. Problem is, the more horse evidence we find doesn't fit this model at all. And so it's one that they don't use, at least they're not supposed to use. We got for instance, they thought they had stuff showing whale evolution. You know what a whale is, right? A whale is a mammal, which means it had to come out of the ocean at some point in the past as a reptile or amphibian, eventually evolve into mammals, and then somehow or other had a desire to return to home, go back to home where he came from originally, and evolve back into an ocean dweller. So, well, how did that happen? Well, he's walking along, and I guess he sees fish in the water, and he wants to eat fish. So he chases them, and somehow or other evolves into something that does that better by living in the water. And his nostrils evolve from here over up into here, so he can breathe better. And the hands become, or claws become flippers, and all of that helps, gets rid of the hair and the, okay, you get the idea. So even that, and they found a couple of fossils that are interesting on whale evolution, but the more even evolutionists look at it, they say, yes, it's not working either. Point is, we have fewer examples. So how do you even get a fossil? How do you make one? Take a look at these fish fossils coming up here. Isn't that incredible? Look at all the fish. We lost a lot of fish in the flood. How can that be? Well, if you've ever been a fish owner as a pet, you know you got to keep the temperature just so. So the temperature was heated a lot during the flood by volcanic action. We think that was one way. The other is you get a lot of mud in the water, and fish would have a hard time breathing as well. So anyway, we did lose a lot of fish. But look at this one in the middle. It is gorgeously preserved. Look at the detail on the scales and everything. How in the world do you make something like that? It's not easy. And guess what? We're not making them that way today. And this evolutionist admits this. He's talking particularly about fish fossils. What he says, the explanation of the origin of fossils by the theory of uniformity in evolution, uniformitarianism, contradicts the fundamental principle of these theories that nothing took place in the past that does not take place in the present. That's what we all taught. But hey, today, no fossils are formed, which is another way of saying something happened in the past that ain't happening now. Okay, so we're all admitting on this now. The Ice Age. Oh, guess what? Ice Age. Did we have an Ice Age, and how did it happen? Yes, we did have an Ice Age. We got frozen mammoths from the Ice Age. There's no question. There's lots of evidence that we had an Ice Age. How long did it last? What caused it? Well, I'll tell you this. The cause of it I can give you quotes from here till sundown. Although theories abound, no one really knows what causes ice ages. There's lots of scientists that say the same thing. You probably haven't heard this, but ice age, but they'll all say, boy, did we have one? And, oh, do we know how it happened? No. But boy, did we have one. What you need cold summers and lots of precipitation. What can do that? Cold summers. In other words, you get ice and snow built up, but they won't melt out during the summer. Where's that going to happen? How's that going to happen? Well, here's what you need. You need volcanoes. Hello? You need volcanoes. Why is it that the Ice Age only happened in Siberia and North America and maybe just a place or two in Europe, but not really across Europe? Why did that happen? Well, where are the volcanoes? They're over here. And the volcanoes did something that I'm trying to animate here in this picture. So you got volcanoes in the oceans, along the rims and so on, producing ash. And what ash does in the atmosphere, it goes over the top of the land and absolutely blocks the sun off. The sun rays bounce off that ash and everything underneath suddenly becomes very cold, very cold. And if that ash is up there and thick and stays for a while, bingo. And meanwhile, the water is warmed up by those volcanoes, which increases the amount of evaporation. The evaporation includes more precipitation going over and landing on top of cold land. And boy, that's it. You're going to get long, cold, icy summers. And all the things that happened in the Ice Age can be best answered by a probably 200 or 300 or 400-year-old ice age that was caused at the tail end of the flood, with the volcano still fairly active. Does that make sense? You can't come up with any other scenario that I can think of that would make sense. Okay, you like my animations? Pretty good? Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. If evolution was true, what sort of evidence would we expect to find? Fossil theory showing transitions, no transitions to new species, and I mean none. And when there's no evidence, that's evidence. Evidence that the theory isn't right. Simpler life in deeper strata? No, we got very complex trilobites. Fewer species in deeper strata? No, we're losing species today. I remember seeing an interview of a Japanese scientist, an evolutionist, who's talking about the evolution tree of life. He says, the trees are depicted this way in our books. It ought to be this way because we're losing species all the time. And macroevolution going on today. And if you believe evolution is pushed by environmental changes or something like that, some major thing, well then there ought to be some macroevolution going on today, and we're not seeing any major steps in that. Now, if creation was true and the flood was true, what sort of evidence would we find? Lack of transitions to new species. Stasis, the rule for fossil record. What's a stasis? What does the word stasis mean? Anybody know? Stays the same. Changes, doesn't change. It's the opposite of evolution. Evolution means change. Stasis means no change. Stasis is a rule for the fossil record. How do I mean that? Okay, let's say, I'm coming back. Let me get my T-Rex and come back. So here's a T-Rex, okay? Let's use T-Rex as an illustration. Let's say T-Rex lived between 73 million years ago and 65 million years ago. So about an 8 million year run, okay? So when we look at 73 million year old and compare it with 65 million year old T-Rex skeletons, there's no difference. We don't see an old version and a more modern version coming up. Do you follow what I mean? It's kind of like burying Buicks or something, gentlemen. Let's say burying a 54 Buick and then a 57 and then a 59 and a 60. And you can tell they're Buicks, but the deeper ones are older style and the newer ones are newer style. No, they're all just 54 Buick. Well, okay, they're all Buicks the same year. Same model all the way through. And that's what stasis is showing. Complex life forms at all layers and more varieties and deeper stratas. Yeah, that's what we find. We find all of that. Now, but we have a problem. Yes, we do. Creationists do have a problem, and that's fossil order. Hard to explain. And let's see what that's talking about. In other words, why is it that certain layers have dinosaurs in them and pretty much no other layers do? Why is it that, that certain plants are at certain levels, or mammals are at certain levels, and they're not really, you know, because in my mind, when I heard about the flood as a kid, I thought it must have been some kind of washing machine churning everything and tossing it back and forth and making it a very homogeneous, mixed up group. And then when the water receded, that it was just left a kind of a mixed layer of everything. That's what I assumed might be it. And guess what? Not even close to that. Things are really fairly organized in layers, which sort of supports evolution a little bit if you want to go that way. But here's the thing. Take a look at this picture. You see a piece of Coconino sandstone, which is a piece I have in my collection. It's about this big, about an inch thick. And what it has, it's sandstone. What it has, it's from the Grand Canyon area. It's got footprints of a little lizard of some kind they don't even know. Never found a bone of this animal, though it made lots and lots of footprints. It got claws, and so it's not webbed. So it's got claws. So with sandstone, they assume this is a dry formation. This happened in a desert, no water involved. That's how this made. Well, Dr. Leonard Brand on the right side there says, I wonder if that's really the way it happened. Because he looked at such things as the push up on the back of the footprints, like this mounding on the left picture. And he said, how do you get footprints with that kind of mound, that shape? He wanted to see if he could duplicate it. So he put sand in, laboratories put sand in a tank. Then he took a salamander. You are my volunteer. Walk. And so walked around and made footprints, but did not make the right kind of footprints. And then he put a little water in there, and it still didn't make. Then he put a lot of water in there, still didn't make the right footprints. And he put enough water in there where the animal was actually splashing as it was walking, and that made the right footprints. And so what he was showing is this was made not in a dry desert, and he published his work on this, not in a dry situation, but where there was water and plenty of it. And the animals, in this particular case, you can see the animals are all interested. There's at least 3, and they're going in the same direction. If they're going in the same direction and the water is, they're splashing to get in that direction, what's going on? They are trying to escape rising water. Does that make sense? They're going uphill. They're trying to get out of the water. The water's coming, and they're trying to get away from it. Now, if that's the case, that tells me something. That's why we have footprints, lots of footprints of dinosaurs and everything else. What we have is evidence that there was water that came up like this. And when water comes up like this, animals have for a period of time a chance to collect around high points, hills, and everything. And the water catches them, grouped together, covers them up, and very organized with the plants that were in their area as well. And they're all buried together, and then up, 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 up we go. Now, somebody asked me earlier what happened to people. I want you to keep that question in mind as we just talked about it right there. So I'm going to skip this video and go here. Briefly, we're going to talk about the ark, and we'll finish up this subject. So how big was the ark? And please don't just say big. How big was the ark? What did they use to measure it with? What were the measurements in? Cubits. What's a cubit? Show me a cubit. Okay, right there. He's got it. A cubit is from here to here. That's a cubit. About 18 inches. Or are we talking about Moses or Noah? Let's just go. If you believe that maybe the people before the flood were larger, which there's a little bit of evidence for too, and I can talk about that, but let's just assume for a minute that we'll go conservative and go with Moses' numbers, okay, and make it a little smaller. If it was Noah's, that might be interesting. So 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, 45 feet tall, 3 decks, with a total capacity of 1.5 million cubic feet. And if you were to use modern train cars, how many would it take to unload and fill? 522. I think we're talking about a pretty good capacity in this, pretty big. And yet people have questions about it when it says every animal came in, pairs of every animal came with the breath of life into the ark. You might have questions, what did we have in the ark? The Hebrew word is not helpful. Kinds, berman, kinds. Two of every kind came in. What does that mean? Species, genus, family, order? What are we talking about? And hear me out on this. There was a biology professor from Southern Adventist University who gave a talk at a creation conference. And he explained why, in his opinion, what happened to fill the ark were not species or genera or anything like it. It was up to family. And for instance, 2 cats, period, for all the cats we have, big cats, little cats. 2 wolves for all the dogs and everything we have. And that one's a little easier to support. And basically 2 of each. And I asked him the question, how many are you talking about? 700, 800, something like that. Oh, well, that's manageable. But it could have been more than that. And yeah, I think probably more than that. But here's the thing, cats. Let me give you an example of cats. I'm going to work myself to a theory that's a good theory because you can't disprove it. But here we go. Here's the cat. Listen to this. One time I had a week of prayer in a school in the Coos Bay area and in Oregon, and had some afternoons available. And so I was driving down toward Bandon, which is toward the coast, down below Coos Bay. And I was coming up on some signs, petting zoo ahead, and I'm thinking, okay, goats, what, big deal, ma and pa thing. So you keep going further and it says, largest petting zoo in North America. Okay. And I had pictures of lions and tigers and everything. I thought, I'm pulling in here. So anyway, I pulled in there, and they did have some animals available that you would normally. I was able to hold a little red fox pup, like that, just as cute as could be, my goodness. And possum was in somebody's wool cap. I pulled down, a little baby possum was in it. I was able to touch a lynx and a bear cub. But what the star of the show was, but we couldn't touch him, was a snow leopard. It was a year and a week old. And the handler said, I'm very sorry, but federal law prohibits me. Once it hit 1 year old, I can't let anybody touch it. So what? But demonstrated with this big cat, if you've ever seen a snow leopard, they had humongous long tails, fluffy, gorgeous, white and speckled and fabulous looking cat. But anyway, this guy had a stick with a string and a ball and feathers on it. And so he was playing with this cat, and he was mucking it on the wall and around the desk kind of area and all these different places. And this cat was just diving for its life worth all over chasing this little feathered ball. And I'm looking at that and said, that's a kitty cat. I've had those. I'm a cat person. That's a kitty cat. It's got the same genes running in it that my cats have had. It was just a big furry kitty cat. So the point is this. Okay, here's my theory. My theory is based a little bit on the Bible's description of the human races getting off of the ark. For instance, Noah's grandson was named Cush. Now, Cush is a Hebrew word that basically can be translated as black. And many of the Africans referenced in the Old Testament are called Cushites. That is a Hebrew word that's describing the African race. And of course, we're all part of the human race. You understand what I mean? Subrace, whatever you want to call it. Families of man. The point is that variety was already available and developed within a generation or two from Noah. And the point is, the genes, the genetic makeup, the vitality, the strength of the DNA composition of these people coming off of the ark allowed them to make a wide variety of children. I mean, they lived 900 years, right, if we believe that. So they're made something, we are so far evolved downward from what they used to be. But they were able to produce this wide variety of offspring and children. When God says fill the earth, I don't think he just meant with exactly the same kind. I think he said, spread out and let you have the varieties fill the earth and the beauty of the different kinds fill the earth. If that's the case with the humans, and that's based on the Cush-Noah connection, then how about the animals as well? Were the animals pre-flood likewise super healthy? I mean, we believe many of the species were larger than they are now. Were they able to produce a wide variety with the vitality and strength of their DNA makeup back then as we are now? Maybe they had many what we would call species within just a couple of generations. Why not? I'm a birder. Sorry, I'm admitting this, coming out of the closet. I love to watch birds. I go to places to see birds. Is that dumb or what? No, it's not, but I'll say that anyway. And I love to study birds, and the thing is, how about hummingbirds? All the variety of hummingbirds. They're all the same bird. They're a little different in color. They're a little different in size. It's very easy for me to imagine a grandpa, grandma hummingbird that produced that variety. How about woodpeckers? How about a downy and a hairy woodpecker? You know the difference? Size only. I mean, you take a hairy woodpecker and you scrunch it down into a downy, it would be the same thing. Or stretch the downy into a hairy. The point is, they probably did have a common ancestor. Yes, it's hard to imagine the two separate lines coming up and looking identical like that, except for size. So the point is, I think that possibly you didn't need all of the species of the animals today to fill the ark and produce all of the DNA in the bank for producing all the varieties we see today. At least I think so. Besides, like I say, we're losing species every day, so the DNA is not very healthy today. What happened in the evidence of pre-flood man? This is one of the saddest verses in the Bible. Then the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. So look at this verse. And the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth. So much pain, so much violence. It hurt, and he was grieved in his heart. And I'd like to look at the original words there, but I'm betting you that it was heart there is probably in the gut. And it hurt God to think about man, and that is a sad picture for me. So what did he decide to do? He decided to take man and wipe him off. I will destroy man whom I created from the face of the earth. The word destroy there means to wipe off like you would clean off a plate at the sink. Do this. I will do this to man. Boom. Where'd he go? Gone. So to some extent, I wonder if the wording there is hinting what happened to the human race. Because take a look at this. Remember, you've already seen that the water was coming up slowly from the footprints of those animals. If the water's coming up slowly, then man has time to get to the highest places. And if you look at patriarchs and prophets, that's exactly what she says there too. But anyway, and it says they get to the highest points, and the waters prevailed exceedingly on the earth, and all the high hills under the whole heaven were covered, including where people were. And the waters prevailed on the earth how long? How long? I'm trying to wake you up. That was a good lunch. 150 days. And 150 days would probably beat to pulp what's left of those human bodies that were at the top. And there's nothing left to cover them because they're already at the top of the hills. There's nothing left in terms of material to bury them and fossilize them because they were out of place. So at least that's a partial answer to a very good question. But I'm going to conclude with this science observation. Why are there so few people in the world? If we came out of Africa 1 to 2 million years ago, there should be many more people today. What happened to the human population, a corresponding larger genetic variation? That question is asked by population experts who are evolutionists. This means that, this is them talking, this means you've got to come up with a hypothesis for an event that wiped out the vast majority of that genetic variation. Something caused the human population to drop drastically. When or how often that may have happened is anybody's guess. Possible culprits include disease, environmental disaster, and conflict. Okay, what are they saying? Boy, sometime in the past we got down to, I don't know, like 8 people. Wonder what could have done that? I'm sorry, but that's exactly what they're saying. So, you know, at the top of Mount Everest almost, I'm just going to go quickly through this. Floodwaters, according to the Psalms, the mountains rose. Right up at, almost at the very top, there's sedimentary rock. What is that, 6 miles up. So, scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. For this they willfully forget that the word of God, by the word of God, the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of water and in the water, by which the world that then existed perished, being flooded with water. So people are going to ignore evidence in these last days. Scoff at the idea that there was a flood. Well, okay, but the evidence is there. And this is the message that they are scoffing at, the idea that Jesus is coming again. And we are to worship the one who made heaven and earth and seas and the springs of water, as you've seen already this morning, the fountains of the great deep. This is the last slide. Jesus said this, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark and did not know until the flood came and took them all away, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. Well, what does that mean? What is he saying? He's saying that someday the Seahawks will have a Sunday away game over in some city. There will be some kind of road work going on around one of the bridges here. It slows down everybody, people talking about it. Somebody in Washington, D.C. will say something kind of stupid, and that'll make all the news. Somebody in Hollywood will be going through some divorce, and oh my goodness. And then Jesus will come. Amen. Just like that. Just to surprise the whole world, catch it all off guard. Things will be going on as normal up until that very moment. And the reason I go around and talk about these things is because I want everybody to be ready. I want everybody ready. I don't want anybody to be caught off guard. I want all of you to have your spiritual bags packed and ready to go. Your ticket checked, clicked, punched, and ready to board, because that day is coming very soon. Amen? Amen. And the most powerful physical evidence of that fact is the evidence left behind by the flood. It's proof that it is going to happen again. That there are scoffers about it, that's also predicted too. There we go. All right. I'm not going to have prayer. Well, I should probably have prayer after that verse, but let me pray, okay? Heavenly Father, I want everyone in this room to be ready. Please let them be ready, not just us, but the ones that are watching at home. We pray, Lord, that all will be inspired to be ready for that great day. It's coming soon, I think. I think we can see around us things that are surprising us in this world. So much fear in this world, so many things happening. We pray, Lord, that you'll be with us and our family and friends. Help us all to be ready for the great day, the best day the world has ever seen, at least for those ready. And maybe another bad day for those that aren't. So help us to be in that first group, Lord. We want to be ready. Take us home. Jesus has prepared a place for us. We want to go there. We thank you in his name. Amen. Should we get up and stretch for a minute before we do our last talk?
A quick break
Okay.
before we do the last session, so we can get moving right away. So stand up, do a few jumping jacks, use the restroom quickly, and then let's try to get started within 5 minutes, so by 10 after.
Some of us can't do the restroom quickly anymore.
Oh, yes, sir. Yeah. Hi.
Thank you for all your time that you spent,
Oh.
all that you're doing.
Okay.
I'm headed to the house. My husband's by himself, so
I understand.
but they're taping it, so I get to show him.
I hope so, that you get to see it. Good, good. Yeah, I
So
will.
I appreciate all your work.
I thank you that you came and you left your husband for a little bit, but get back to him. Thank you.
How long is that?
Because I'm going to Hawaii with
off the
Ellie
flood. These things
on
are
the
made. Hello, we are going to continue on here now with the talk about the origin of the earth. And in this particular talk, we are going to specifically address what's considered probably the weakest area in creationism, and that is the age of the earth. So we will take a look at that whole subject as we look. So origin of the earth. So we start off with another extremely boring science quote, but hang in there, it is kind of fun. The most widely used mutation rate for non-coding human mitochondrial DNA, aren't you liking this so far? Relies on estimates of the date when humans and chimpanzees shared a common ancestor, taken to be 5 million years old. But a few studies have begun to suggest that the actual rates are much faster of mutation rate. These are not bad mutations. Evolutionists are most concerned about the effect of the faster mutation rate. Researchers have calculated that mitochondrial Eve, this is all through women, mitochondrial, lived 100 to 200,000 years ago in Africa. Using the new clock, she would be a mere 6,000 years old. No one thinks that's the case. I think that's funny. When they just simply went with science and did the work, they came out with an age of the earth about 6,000 years. And that just cracks me up. And they say, whoa, 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 let's take a look at this. It's kind of fun. So how old is everything? Age issues is what we're talking about in particular. Depends upon what glasses you're looking at. You've heard of Archbishop Usher? He believed that God started creating the world on Sunday, October 29, 4004 BC. One of his colleagues, I think, even put it at 9 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, why do you come up with such precise dates? Well, we'll talk about that because against him you have uniformitarianism, only observable, and he was most definitely saying not a flood. In fact, he went on to say we had no vestige, come back, no vestige of a beginning, no prospect of an end. So that's a bit of a challenge in his day against Bible believers. So what was going on in England at the time? They look at mountains like this is in England, looked at a mountain like this and said, surely this is older than just 4,500 years to the dating it to the time of the flood. Surely it's older. Look at how old it looks. So, well, okay. A guy by the name of Charles Lyell came along and wrote Principles of Geology. That's the book that Charles Darwin took with him to the Galapagos. He imagined the Earth to be perhaps 1 million or 2 million years old. That's pretty old. Okay, and Darwin liked that because it gave it time for his little changes to add up to big changes. But you have somebody like Baron Kelvin Thomson here, studied heat loss and estimated the age of the Earth to be 20 and 40 million years. Okay, it's getting older. He said it couldn't be any older than that because the Earth would be too cold. Well, a guy by the name of Ernest Rutherford came along and said, no, it wouldn't be too too cold because there's things going on the earth that makes the earth stay warm, and that's radioactivity. And you imagine the earth to be even older than Thomson did. The currently accepted age of the earth is, drum roll, 4.55 billion years old, okay? That's the currently accepted age of the earth. Now remember what the Bible is for evolutionists. It's a geologic column, but I wanted to show you, okay, whoops, it went away. Oh, that is really weird. It's never done that. Let me start over again. Bink, bink. Oh, the table is gone. Who knows what happened there? Okay, so that's supposed to go away, and you see in the left a geologic column, the table, and all of these places. That is really interesting. That's never happened before. But anyway, okay. Yeah, interesting. I wonder if it shows up later. Does it show up later? No, it doesn't. Okay, phooey. So anyway, you see the different places in the millions of years where these things supposedly happen. Okay, never mind. How old can you tell a rock to be? Wouldn't it be nice if they all came with an age stamp on it? That'd be really nice. 1620 for that one. Where's that rock at? Plymouth Rock. Yeah, somebody went to the trouble of carving the date in it. Well, anyway, how old? Remember, there's the three basic types, so you all remember what these are. But the datable rock is igneous rock. Remember, the sedimentary rock is made up of a whole bunch of tiny little bits of something else. You need something that started and it still is what it is, and that is an igneous rock. And lava in particular is what's dated. Okay, we're going to go a little science here, and I realize you've gotten up recently and got the blood flowing, so that's helpful because that was a great lunch. Okay, hang with me here as we try to explain radiometric dating. That's measuring decay in rocks, decay or change. And that we, first of all, have to assume that the rates never change. Can't speed it up or slow it down. What you have when you start off with, how much you have of things, is helpful. We're talking about mother versus daughter stuff. And then rock samples have been chemically and physically isolated, a closed system. Nothing comes in, nothing pulls stuff out. Okay, got all that? Good. Now, remember half-life from school? Half-lives? Science? Okay. Okay. Some of us lived a few half-lives, maybe. Okay, so what is a half-life? Understand that in an igneous rock, you're starting off with it's called an isotope, but it's really an element. It's a variety of an element. An isotope starts off, and then it decays. It breaks apart. It falls apart. We're all doing that, incidentally. Anyway, we're living on this planet, we're falling apart. Yeah, do I need to explain this further? Okay, our bodies have every known system in it to fix it. It's just, it can't quite keep up. Am I right? Okay, all right. White hair, how do we get white hair? Because I tell kids this because they're curious about how you get white hair. As if we all aren't. Anyway, right down in the base of the root of that hair, that mechanism that makes color has died. And when it comes out colorless, that's white. So anyway, it's falling apart. The good news we'll hold for later. So here we go, half-life. You start off with an isotope, a chemical. When the rock is born, when it hardens, that's when you start the clock, because anything that was a daughter, it gets off and goes away while it's liquid. But when it's hard, we're starting the clock again. Okay, and the mother stuff breaks down into the daughter stuff. And how much mother we have and how much daughter we have, when we compare the percentages, and we know how fast it takes to go that way, that's how they do the math on this. So take a look. The mother stuff is represented by this green area here. Now, every time you lose, this time going that way, every time you lose half of mom to become daughter, like right there, however much time that is, that's a half-life. That's a half-life. You lose half that long, that's a half-life. Okay, you still got mother left. Another half-life, you're going to only have a quarter of her left because you lost another half, another half, another half. Does that make sense, kind of? Wow. Okay, you're good. Okay, we should have them step up, stand up and do this more often a little bit. And, wake up, and yeah, it would help me. Now, so remember, that's the way that you do dating. Now, carbon-14 is done the same way, but carbon-14 is not used for millions of years. It's used for thousands of years because it has too short of a half-life. Carbon-14 dating, this method is used in dating organic things that used to be alive, okay? It measures the rate of the ratio of normal carbon-12 to heavy carbon-14, which has a half-life of how many years? 5,700 years. Okay, it cannot be used to get dates in the millions of years, but it routinely gives dates that are older than biblical chronology. So whenever you see some date about Native American people were here in, on the peninsula or somewhere here 50,000 years ago or 40,000 years ago, which is sooner than we, all this kind of stuff. They are probably relying on carbon-14 dating. They are almost never relying on anything very solid on dates. If there's anything you can feel is pretty weak scientifically, it's going to be the dates.
Sorry, I don't understand.
Oh, well, that's okay. A lot of people, no, that's all right. Let me explain it then again. Okay, so where does carbon-14 come from? And this is really a good question because we don't naturally have carbon-14. How do they use it to interpret dates? Okay, now the next picture represents hours and hours of work, so a certain amount of acknowledgement of that would be appreciated by the speaker. Okay, here we go. Our particle comes from outer space and smacks into a nitrogen atom, knocks a piece or two off, and that becomes a carbon-14 atom. Carbon-14 mixes in the air, becomes part of carbon dioxide, and that gets into our plants. Yes, they go in our plants. Our plants love carbon dioxide, and so gets into the plants. Well, then those plants get chewed up by little critters, cute little critters sometimes, and they eat that, and they get carbon-14 in them that way too. They don't breathe carbon dioxide. They get carbon by eating. Okay. But the day comes, sadly, when they don't get any more carbon-14 in them. They stop living. And carbon-14 that's left in them loses their bits and pieces over time and goes back to nitrogen-14, okay? So what you do is you measure the carbon-14 in that critter and their bones or whatever and compare it to carbon-12, and you know how long ago they stopped eating. Okay, that's all right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That was, yes, it's certainly well worth it. So I thank you. So that's carbon-14 dating, and that's how they go with the thousands of years. However, remember, you got to have certain assumptions working. You got to know initial ratios. Carbon-14 right now is more or less produced at about the same rate it goes into the plants, meaning that it's about stable now, and you should be able to use the dates for a while. But when volcanoes happen, major volcanoes eject carbon into the atmosphere, it throws all the clocks off. Because suddenly you got more 12 around than you used to have. And that can lead to more 12 in plants and things, and that's going to give you older dates, false readings. It's a real tricky thing. And carbon-14 dating is not very reliable unless it's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years old or something. It's probably helpful that way. But if you go back closer to the flood when there are lots of volcanoes, no, it's not going to be helpful. Now here's a carbon-14 lab complaining about their problems. The troubles of the radiocarbon dating method are undeniably deep and serious. It should be no surprise then that fully half of the dates are rejected. The wonder is surely that the remaining half come to be accepted. There are gross discrepancies, the chronology is uneven and relative, and it sounds like the people had a bad day. And the accepted dates are actually selected dates. Okay, okay. If you're a scientist, you dug up some stuff, and you have a rough idea where you kind of hope they will be, and you give them samples to the lab, and they come out with about 5 different dates, but only one of them is close to the date you really want. Guess what? It's that date. So, I mean, that's a cynical approach, and I'm sure there are some that are more honest than that. But this is a lab talking about it. This is a lab. These are people that are professionals that are complaining about the use of carbon-14 in science. So don't worry about carbon-14. Now, but the potassium argon is something else. And that potassium argon is lava. So what happens with potassium argon? Okay. First of all, potassium is a metalloid, it's a solid, and it becomes a gas as it breaks down to argon-40. And that's a very long half-life. It takes a whole long time for half of it to go, like 1.25 billion years. So what's going on there? Well, first of all, should I have time to talk about I'll do it. Guess what this is? You know what it is. Tell them what it is.
It's lava from Hawaii that you pushed in the middle cup with a stick.
Oh, you took away all my drama and all this stuff. I got to do about 17 years ago something that every red-blooded American male wants to do once in their life, and that is play in lava. Am I right? Am I right? Who doesn't want to try that? So, okay, I go to Hawaii. It's our 25th wedding anniversary. Okay, points for that, ladies, hopefully. Well, we go to Hawaii for that anniversary, but the day comes when I actually do can we drive over to, let's go look where the lava is coming out. And so we drive over to where the lava is coming out, right? Or at least as close as we could get to it. Old lava had flowed over the highway. You had to park there, get out. I walked over to a kiosk where there was a ranger woman waiting inside. And this is all inside the national park there at the Volcanoes National Park. That's a huge area. Anyway, I was aware that the eruption had been going on for 40 years, just continuing. I asked the lady, is it possible for me to walk up to where the lava is coming out and take a look up close? And what was I expecting? No. Are you nuts? Yeah, actually she said, why sure, just be careful. It's right up there. Can you see that heat signature, that little mirage thing right there? Yeah, that's where it is, just be careful. Thank you very much. So I started walking over these old flows over and over and over, picked up a long stick while I'm on the way, going over and over and over, finally got up to where it was slowly oozing out of the side of the hill. And there was another guy there, and he took pictures of me, which recorded the truthful event. But anyway, so in my mind, I had the day before bought a little metal, a little scoop like this, and I thought, I'm just going to just dip it in and just get a little bit that way. That's what I'll do. So have you heard that lava is hot? Lava is really, really hot. 2,000 degrees hot. So think of your oven at home. Does it go up to 550, 575? This is 2,000. So anyway, I could not get any closer to the lava than, say, right from here to that wall. Okay, camera, we're talking about 10 feet or so. Is about as close as I could get. So what did I do? I put this on a rock, empty thing, and then I took my stick and I went over as close as I could to the lava and tried to get a little bit to stick to the stick. And so I dipped it in there and caught on fire and dropped, put it in again, caught on fire, dropped, put it in again, caught on fire. Oh, it's not dropped yet. Okay, it's still on fire, but it's on the stick. And I poked it in that thing and jammed it in there and dropped the stick and had my water bottle and poured water on it, and there's my illegally collected sample of lava from a national park.
Have you asked for forgiveness?
Well, first of all, I don't believe that Pele, the goddess, is going to come and get me, because I think that's a clever marketing scheme from Hawaii. But no, I think we're okay. But What I want to do someday is break off a little piece of this and send it to a lab and ask them to give me their date. Because I was there the day this was born. I understand the concept. This is just a few years old, and I'd like to see the date I get back. The problem is they're very sharp on things like that, and they probably ask me where I got it and what date do I think it's going to be and all this kind of stuff. So they don't want to be embarrassed, and I totally get that. But anyway, so, oh yeah, but here's the problem for, yes?
What would an analysis like that cost?
Probably a few $100s, this is assuming they would accept it, because they don't want to be embarrassed. And
Run it through a couple other people.
I like the way you're thinking. But anyway, yeah, it might be worth something. Anyway, lava flows, you might think that we can figure out what the problem is here for creationists, but here it is. This is it. The fact is that fossil layers occasionally have beds of lava in between them. Any flows of lava in between these fossil records, we know this to be the time of flood. So the lava has got to date to the time of the flood. And that's just simply got to be true. But I think they're just a few thousand years old. So let's take a look. Let's use some of their methods on some famous examples. Now this is a fairly famous, commonly used by creationists example. This is Uinkaret Plateau near the Grand Canyon. And four different methods of dating this lava flow that flowed down the side of this rock formation were dated. And please notice, at the top you got potassium argon comes in at anywhere between, and My is millions of years. So anywhere between 10,000 and 17 million years from the same flow. Okay, did you hear that? Several dates between 10,000 and 17 million years dating from the same flow. Now take a look at the other methods, which is rubidium-strontium isomer, and lead-lead isomer, and you've got dates that are in the billions of years. And so how can you have such, they should all date very similar, very close, using no dating methods. Just for fun of it, look right down there. You see a little flow that's clearly older than the ones on top, and yet in almost every case date to younger than the ones that are on top. So you see problems there? So there's not consistency in this record. There's lots of issues of consistency for potassium argon. Look at all these different locations where the date is a known date for the flow. And here are known years, and yet here are the dates that came out for those. Okay, so I don't think you'll lose any sleep over the subject of potassium argon and disproving the Bible claims of years. So you can see there's an inconsistency. Even Mount St. Helens, some of the lava flows there were dated in the billions of years. Take a look at this. Here's, for instance, a limestone covering of a carbonized tree stump. And the limestone, of course, would have to be from Jurassic period. That's like 189 million years. And yet there was enough carbon-14 in the stump to actually date it to much sooner. Of course, we wouldn't agree even with that date, but look at the variation. So issues for dating the Earth. Let's talk about living fossils, for instance. The British Museum, this is a very famous example. Have you ever heard of the coelacanth? The coelacanth was a famous fish on display in the British Museum in 1938, up to 400 million years old. And what they really liked about this fossil, being an early fish fossil, take a look at those bottom fins right there. Do you see some circles? Did the circles show up? No, let me do it again. There they are, right there. See those fins? Boy, they sure look like they're going to become leg fins someday. They're going to be legs as they walk out onto the ground. Yes, sir. This is on the way to becoming a land animal fossil. Okay, so 1938. And you know what else happened in 1938? They found one. The fishermen in South Africa pulled one up. And this lady was a local, something of a scientist museum lady. And she heard about them finding this fish, and she absolutely dashed down there, but they had already cleaned it, so removed the internal parts. So anyway, but she still got the picture, and it was a coelacanth. It was a coelacanth. They thought it was extinct for, millions and millions of years old. Since they've been finding all kinds of them, hundreds. And they've even videoed them swimming, and you know what they found out those fins are used for? Swimming. They're not hopping on the bottom or doing anything that's kind of looking like someday those are going to be legs. Anyway, it's interesting. So living fossils. How about this thing? Have you ever seen these before? Ever been to Massachusetts and seen horseshoe crabs? They are so weird. They look like, Martian crabs or something. But anyway, guess what? We got them 400 million years old in artificial layers, and absolutely right down to every single bump and everything is identical. There's no apparent evolution going on in this critter. And of course, I've got these up here. Take a look at these. These are from Solnhofen, Germany, and this is 150 million years old, and they don't seem to have any evolution at all. Okay. Now, here's a cool story from Australia. Australia used to be open to tourists. If you remember Australia before it used to be closed to tourists? You know it is right now. COVID, can't go in, can't get out. So, slam dunk. But anyway, before that, and you could go to Wollemi National Park, and this is not terribly far from Sydney. And this is a picture of a young, handsome ranger. And this young guy named Dave Noble said to his park superintendent, I am going to go study a canyon over here that requires this rope to get down into, and I want to go see what's in that canyon, and I'll come and give you a report. Okay, go ahead. So he did, and you know what he found? He found a grove of trees that he had never seen anything like. He collected some samples, took pictures, and it turned out this was thought to be an extinct tree. Supposedly millions of years ago, and but it's absolutely identical to fossils that date up to 200 million years old. It's still alive today, called the Wollemi pine. And I used to have a Wollemi pine. Let me tell you, it's kind of a cool story. Wollemi pine is a rarest tree in the world in nature, because they just have that one grove there. It's less than 100 trees. But it's very prolific in making pine cones. So it makes a lot of seeds. And so they've actually sold seeds and even seedlings to raise money to protect the originals, which is brilliant. So anyway, I bought once a seedling back when they exported them. They don't anymore. And I had it for a while, and it grew up to about like this, and I had it on my, my tabletop in our place in Moscow, Idaho. And enjoyed the plant and used it when I'm talking about living fossils. Well, the day came when it was getting a little big, and I thought, I need to do something with it. I gave it to the University of Idaho's agricultural department, and they had a rare plant display. So I gave it to them. They're very happy to get it in their greenhouses. And they said, Stan, anytime you want to come, just come get it and take it and use it for a lecture, bring it back afterward. Okay, we're good. Okay, thank you. So I did that once. Second time I came back, it was gone. Somebody had taken it. And they had a turnover in leadership, so no one knew anything. But I want to get one again someday. I want to get another again. It's a beautiful tree. I told you about the bird footprints, how they show up too early in the fossil layer to be helpful to evolution, 55 million years too deep in the fossil record to find footprints of birds that were supposed to show up at the time of Archaeopteryx in Middle Jurassic layers. Okay, how about issues for dating the Earth? Let's see other issues. Missing rock. Da-da-da. Where'd that rock go? Unconformity. In other words, here down at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, there's a line in there. It's a famous thing. It's called the Great, the Great Unconformity. Do you have water anywhere? Bottled water or a drink? I'd love to have that. I'm drying up here a little bit. Talking too much. Let this be a warning. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Let this be a warning. We should listen more than talk. I'm not listening to me. Okay, so down at the bottom of this Grand Canyon layer, there is a layer of rock that's literally where it shouldn't be. And there should be another billion years of rock right there. And it's gone. So, where did it go? It's nice, cleanly removed. Miracles of preservation. There's some miracles. For instance, we talked about the soft tissue in a dinosaur bone. Guess what that's led to? That many, at least, and this is a couple of years old now. There's probably many more. But they have now found in fossils of Triceratops, duck-billed dinosaur, you see all of that there. They have found proteins in all of these fossils. Proteins break down immediately. And absolutely, you're not going to have any after a few thousand years. And here we have them in fossils supposedly hundreds of millions of years old. So very difficult to explain. Okay, take a look at this now. Natural gas pipe. Look how fast you can grow rock in it. And all of these things which used to be thought of as taking years and years and years to make, we now can do all of these in a very short period of time. In Mammoth Hot Springs, there at the top of Yellowstone, you go and take a look at calcium carbonate deposits with that hot water from mineral springs, making rock right while you're watching. Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. May you have many children. Grandchildren. Okay, may your classes increase. How's that? Oh, that's good. Thank you. Oh, it's even cold too. God, man. Okay, so take a look at these stalactites here in like Carlsbad. I think this is Carlsbad. Yeah. Take a look at this. And I have a cut stalactite up here that you can take a look at, and you can see the growth rings are very rapid. If you're taking a look in Carlsbad and you see a drip, drip on these things, and the ranger will say something like, this took 100,000 years to make this. And they might be right if it's always been drip. Maybe. But what if it was faster? What if it was like the same stuff that's going on as I showed you? That's calcium carbonate. If you have super hot water, very saturated with calcium carbonate, it can make rock while you're watching. So it can be very quick. And take a look at this stalactite again that I had cut, and it's up here to take a look at. And you can see the middle part of it grew very rapidly out to that first ring. That grew very quickly. Then you have some other growth rates two shots afterwards. This is very funny. Take a look at this. From 1924 to 1988, there was a visitors, excuse me, I'm going to get some water. Oh, that's better. What did I do? Probably something funny. Oh, yes, you're reading that. Okay. It said there was a visitor's sign above the sign of the entrance to the Carlsbad Caverns that said Carlsbad was at least 260 million years old. In 1988, the sign was changed to read 7 to 10. And then a little while, the sign read that it was 2 million years old. Now the sign is gone. And this is, look who wrote this. This is one of the people that worked there. So anyway, that's kind of interesting. So what is it? They're learning more, and they're finding out that it can be done quickly. Uniformitarianism. Okay, well, let's use that method to date a few things. Like, for instance, erosion of continents. At the rate that currently this continent is eroding, it should have eroded several times in its past, if it's really a few 100 million years old. Should have eroded into the sea a long time ago. Carbon-14 in wrong places. They found carbon-14 in diamonds. That's not understandable. Lack of salt or sediment in the oceans. The oceans should be saltier if they're as old as they say. Earth magnetic field. Okay, let's wind the clock back. Earth magnetic field is decaying right now, getting weaker. Okay, wind the clock back to when it was stronger. Use the same rate of decay, go backwards. Okay, it wouldn't be terribly long before the magnetic force, the magnetic field of the Earth would have cooked things. If it got too far back, it would have been too hot. How about too much helium in the rocks? One of the decay properties of granite rock is you should have helium as a daughter from decay, and it's got into the air. And for years, they've wondered why there hasn't been more helium in the air from the decay of rocks. Incidentally, we can't make helium. We don't know how to make helium. You have to gather helium from the air. But anyway, it's a soft, have you ever seen a helium balloon? Okay, you try to put it in rubber, what's going to happen? A rubber balloon. It's because the helium will get out the side. Helium's a very tiny atom. It'll get out. Okay, you use mylar. Okay, it'll stay in there longer, but you wait long enough, and even mylar balloons are going to collapse, because the helium will get out. So why is helium still in rocks and not out in the atmosphere? Hang in there, because we're going to talk about something that's a little bit theologically absolutely fascinating as far as I'm concerned, but maybe bore you to death. I don't know. Here we go. Decay. What is decay? What is decay? What is decay in rocks? So, the scriptures I'll show you in a minute says the whole creation is groaning under decay. Groaning, the whole creation, everything. What is decay? I one time attended a creation conference, not Adventist, but multi-denominational. And a speaker who was an atomic physicist worked for the government, like in Los Alamos or something, and he talked about decay in the age of rocks and everything. And he says, we have discovered that there have been decayed in rocks. There's no question about it. Creationists can't get away from it. Rocks are decayed. And they give the appearance of great age. But obviously we don't believe in the great age part, but yes, there's a decay. And there's helium there still in the rocks. So after this talk, this professor, this scientist, is in kind of the aisle. It's between talks. There's a couple of minutes before the next speaker gets up and everything. So obviously everybody's gathered around this guy, and everybody's asking their questions. And I'm thinking, oh man, I would love to ask him a question. How can I get in there? Anyway, so I finally get my way in there, and he looks toward me, and I ask him a question. Says, so, Professor, do you have a theory as to what physically happened on the earth at the moment that sin entered? And he brightened up and said, well, yes, I do. And as if I asked a good question. I thought, oh, good, okay, good question. He says, I feel something like a shock wave went across the earth when sin entered. A shock wave. Obviously, because he's an expert on the rocks, he's thinking the shock wave hit the rocks too. And I so wanted to ask him about 45 other questions after that, but he had to, okay, we're done. We have to, next speaker and all of that, and off he went. But I've thought about that ever since, and I'm going to show you a couple of Bible verses about this. I'm going to just skip to the very end because, well, this is interesting too. Okay. And that is this. What is decay? What is the curse of God? How did God react when sin entered the world? What happened to this planet? And may I suggest to you, it's in the area of God's wrath. Now I'm going to ask you this question. What is God's wrath? Describe it to me. What's God's wrath? Now, and I know we have some guests here, and I know some of you might disagree with the following theology, but may I suggest to you a couple things on that. Did Jesus die from God's wrath? Was he in our place as a sinner before God? That he suffered what the sinner suffers at judgment with God. Am I not right? Boy, you better have that one right. I know it's hard to imagine Jesus, the Son of God, as experiencing his Father's wrath, but he did. That's the deal. So you and I don't. Okay, so did he die from God's wrath? Yes, he did. What was God's wrath? How did it kill Jesus? And remember, and here's where our theology is a little different. I know some people believe in eternally burning hell. I understand that. But unless Jesus is in hell right now, eternally burning, that if you believe that, he did not die as our substitute. Am I right? Okay, so follow me on this. But he did die the sinner's death by representing us as a sacrifice in our place. So what killed Jesus? And Jesus expresses it on the cross. He says, my God, why have you, and really the translation is, why have you left me? May I suggest that this is what happened. Jesus is on the cross. No one has been connected with God the Father like Jesus has. He knows he's there. He almost see him. He's that connected. This is what the Father did. He stepped away from Jesus. And Jesus felt it immediately. Where did you go? That's God's wrath. When God's wrath says, I acknowledge your request. I acknowledge your wish. I leave you. And that's what he did. And Jesus knew that was coming. And he could not see past the grave. But he trusted his Father would do what was right. And that's what killed Jesus, the wrath of God. Now, what does the wrath of God look like in nature? When Adam and Eve sinned, the Father stepped away. And God is an organizer. He's a sustainer. Nothing dies in his presence. He's a source of life. When he pulls back, things start to fall apart, to slowly die, to decay. The rocks, everything dies. And I don't know if it hit the rocks like a force wave. I don't know what exactly is going on there. I'm very curious about God saying that he's cursing the ground and it's not going to, yield itself and all that. And I'm not sure what all that is. But it says that creation is groaning under this, and that's going to be in a couple of slides. The whole creation is groaning under this decay. But God has said it that way, but in hope of changing it later. Let me keep going there. Sorry if I'm getting off track. I'm kind of ahead of myself a little bit. The earth was without form and void. And some people wonder, does that mean the earth was here for 4.55 billion years before God created? Would that solve the problem of the bedrock being very old? No, that's not the problem. We're talking about lava flows in between the layers of the fossil. That's the problem. So that dates millions of years. So we still have some. Oh, incidentally, tohu and bohu. I don't know if there's any part of the Bible I like better than this, because tohu and bohu is how the earth was without form and void, and the earth was tohu and bohu. I don't know. I just like the sound of the words. It's cool. So u on the end of any word means no. So no toe, no bow. Toeless and bowless. So without a form and without a fill. And what does God do in the first 3 days of creation? He forms, and the next days he fills those forms. Isn't that clever? He add an order to it, and then he closes everything with Sabbath. And Sabbath is beautiful. Why did God take so long to create the earth? Because we have all these things from astronomy setting periods. Why a week? Obviously, he set aside the Sabbath as a time to remember creation, and I kind of think God is creating time for us to have an order and so on, and bless the Sabbath day and then sanctified it, set aside, meant to be a memorial creation. However, because of sin, creation, and here we're getting to the concluding part, losing much of its original beauty. Here it is. This is the verse. Listen to this and pick it out. Pick out the things I was talking about. For the creation was subjected to futility. What's futility? Decay, falling apart, not getting ahead, not working forward. No, it's going backwards. Not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope, because the creation also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. So this whole planet is feeling it. You know what's kind of interesting is it's waiting for the revealing of the sons of God. That's us, children of God, revealing of us. I think it's kind of funny that the planet is hindering and waiting for the day that you and I are made right. And then our home is going to follow suit. It's almost like it's waiting in the background saying, okay, come on, people. Get restored. Because we want you restored again and running things again. So, subjected in futility, bondage of corruption. So, for we know, this is funny, or this is deep for me. For we do not know what we should pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself makes intercessions for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. Groanings is what creation is doing. It's groaning and waiting to be delivered until we get to a place where there will be neither moth nor rust corrupting, neither chemical nor biological decay. And I can't hardly imagine what that's going to be like. Can you imagine not growing old? Can you imagine that? I'm not sure if I'm ready to see a great-grandpa that I know of as a young man, or my dad or mom as teenagers. That's going to be an adjustment for me. How about you guys? As far as me being a teenager again, well, that's what I am anyway, but I mean, then the body will look like what's really there. But anyway, that's what I'm looking forward to when decay is no longer a part of the deal. Do you have any questions? I'm sorry that I went off as I did, but you know what? It's funny. Every time I describe the Father stepping backwards, I get chills. I get physical chills. And I just wonder. Yeah, I just wonder. And what's going through Father's head too? Yes.
You know, Stan, whenever I disconnect a battery from a charger,
Yes.
it starts to decline immediately.
Okay.
Long, slow process. It eventually gets to the point, depending upon the kind of battery, where either it continues on a known path or you go over a cliff and then you lose it all.
Yes. Okay.
And it's only perhaps by his mercy that we didn't go from fully charged to zero at the moment of sin's entrance.
Yes.
The grace has
Yes.
allowed us
Yes.
to follow a curve.
Understand when I was describing the Father stepping back, he did this, but he didn't do this. He didn't do this. He didn't do this. So, yes. But we do feel the effects of our choice in asking him to leave. And he says, I'm not sure you entirely understand what you're asking. Step back a little bit, and you'll see, get a little taste of what it's like when I'm not around. Yes?
Have you had discussions about how the salt gets into the ocean and
Yeah.
what would happen to the ocean if the earth was millions of years?
Well, we should have more salt. We should have more sediment in the ocean if you're using the current rates of how much is coming off the continents now and how much is actually in the water. It said the ocean is comparatively young compared to these dates that they supposedly present.
It becomes solid salt if the earth was millions of years old.
Well, okay. In other words, what would be? Have you ever heard of the salt? Have you ever heard of the Dead Sea in Israel?
Yeah.
That's a very salty, super salty water there. And I, like a tourist, I've only been to Israel once, but I went and did my touristy thing and put on the bathing suit and went into the Dead Sea. And you know what? It feels like water. But you can lay backwards on it with your feet in the air and you will not sink. In fact, you can't sink. You can try to sink. You can't sink in that water. It is weird. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, you can get out far enough to where you're off of the ground and you're still floating straight up and down. It is the weirdest thing. You can't sink. And that's because the water has so much salt in it that the buoyancy is different. You know, you just float differently, it'll support more. So it's a very weird thing. However, if you've got any openings, any sores on your body anywhere, yeah, the salt.
So I have a suggestion. You like to bring a lot of humor.
Oh, yes, sir.
That.
Yes?
I looked online, looked up your name, and there's always photos of you looking younger. And I thought that might be a little thing where you showed your gray hair. you can show pictures of you aging and how you take.
Oh, oh.
I thought that would be just right for you to kind of like.
I would get a lot of laughs, but I'm not sure what I would be feeling about it at that time. I do show my picture from UC Riverside on my student ID card when I'm talking about my testimony, and here's a picture of the classroom, and here's what I look like back then. And I have this long hair, and it's kind of
Looks like I did.
and I look really dorky. I look like a complete nerd. And I was a science nerd who wanted to be a hippie who could never be one. But anyway, yeah, that's just back in those days. So yes.
Do you think, I listen to a lot of programs for Joe, like Answers in Genesis.
Okay.
And all that.
Yes.
It seems like there's more evidences for creation now than there was years ago. It seems
Sure.
like we're maybe getting closer to Jesus coming, that he's allowing
Some of us
this
are
to
praying for
happen
that, yeah.
so that those who are seeking it all can hear the other side more clearly.
The thing is, I'm a big believer in teaching evolution. Now, please listen to me before you jump on a conclusion there. The more you teach about what the theory actually is saying, and you really look at every single support they are presenting, you realize it's a house of cards. There's nothing really there. And the problem is they never get deep enough into it. They just tell you that, yeah, this happened, and and that. And so, yeah, and we all believe it. But they don't really give you the nuts and bolts. Well, why do you believe it? Well, give us the evidence. And they don't do that. So the more you actually look at their evidence, the weaker their position is. And I think today more people are seeing that. More people are seeing that. Biologists especially, I think, are, I've got a number of quotes from biologists that are getting skeptical about what they've thought about evolution. You know, another area where it's really weak and getting weaker, I think, is human evolution. They're not finding the bones that they were hoping to find. And the bones that they do find that are potential ancestors are either very human or very ape-like. They're not finding that wonderful middle ground. And the thing is, the more you find only in those two camps, the more you realize we're not finding any because aren't any. That's why we don't, and that's evidence for a different theory than the one that we've been promoting. So, yes?
So if we're humans and we came from apes, how come there's still apes?
Okay, now that's a common thing, but here's the thing, please bear with them. They say, if we evolved from apes, why do we still have apes? And the thought is that not all apes moved in that direction, just one of their kids.
Oh.
Just one of the kids went off.
Are we the black sheep or are they?
No, I'll leave that to you to decide. Who's the black sheep here? Any other questions? Any other questions?
Along with what Monty
Yeah.
said, why haven't we evolved to something else?
Well, we are. Haven't you seen how perfect you and I have become in the last few years? Yeah, perfection works towards silver, don't you think? Yeah, I don't know. Yes, yeah, we're not. Now, it's true that healthier life styles have extended some years, but in terms of the actual physical person, I don't think that there's much evidence that we are continuing to move in the right direction. Yeah.
So what would be lost if they said nothing was as old as 10 billion years old? What would be lost? I think, why don't they just be honest? It just seems like there'd be so much more to be gained by saying, you know, we really don't know the years of this, but we can pinpoint 6,000 years. We can't pinpoint 100 million years or 100 billion years ago.
The answer is probably simpler than you might think. The answer is to the extent that we line up with a biblical understanding, to that extent we are admitting that there is a God. And there is something in the fallen human nature that finds that a difficult concept to accept. Because there's ramifications that make us uncomfortable. Does that mean that we get judged? Does that mean we have to, you know, appear before him at some point and explain why we didn't have time for him? Yeah, So I think there's something, although at some point, let me give you a quote from another a creation scientist named Gary Parker, not an Adventist, creation scientist, and he was asked, Dr. Parker, how many people do you think are really creationists? And he said, oh, I think everybody's a creationist. It's just that some of us are happier about it than others. Now, isn't that good? That's very insightful. Okay, any other questions? And I should repeat them, so I'll make sure that we get that on the view here. Yes, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You first. When God stepped away from Christ,
Yes.
that's when Christ showed his human side of him to us fully, without any question.
Oh, I think he showed his human side more often than that.
One more comment.
Yeah. Okay.
As we can tell we're really close to the end of time because of what's going on in the political arena, the religious arena, the social arena, and the scientific arena. It's all coming out where God is bringing the world closer to the realization that he is coming soon.
There are indications. Okay, let me tell you something. This is a church internal thing. You ready for this? Tithe is up.
Say that again?
Tithe is up. Last 2 years been consistently up and significantly up. And nobody I know has an explanation for it. Why are people suddenly feeling a need to contribute to the Lord's cause that didn't so much a couple of years before? And the point is, it's an indicator. And as a pastor for years, I always know when the tithe is healthy, the spiritual life of the people are pretty good. When it's not, there's problems. And I'm sorry if that sounds like a pastor talking or a conference people, but I just know that to some extent where your heart is, your wallet will follow. It's just true. So tithe has been up across the board, all the conferences, the whole Northwest, and I think even the North American division. They're happy about it. They don't have to lay anybody off, but they're like, wonder why? And and some spiritual thing is quietly working, and we're happy to see it. So anyway, so I agree with you. There are things going on in the world. Some are very seen, some are a little bit under the table, but I think God is winding things up. And I'm not going to go to politics at all. I refuse to go to politics. I'm not going to talk about COVID. I refuse to go with COVID. But I will say this. Look at how fast the world has turned on a dime. Yeah. Look at how fast the world turned on a dime. And look at the major effect of all these things. Fear. Fear, 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 fear. Fear to take the vaccine, fear to not take the vaccine. Fear, 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 fear. Everyone's afraid. And I'm just wondering to what extent that some of this has got a spiritual aspect as well, where, men's hearts failing them for fear of things happening on the earth. So what do? Well, you make sure that your insurance is paid. Your policy is up to date. You make sure that things are good with the boss. Yes.
Regarding the signs of the times, Jesus said that when he was given the signs, that there will be pestilences, famines, earthquakes in diverse places. And he said this will be the beginning of sorrows.
Beginning of sorrows.
And some translations, like the NIV,
Mm-hmm.
describes that as birth pains.
Okay.
So these natural disasters, or like birth pains. And the thing about it, they start out kind of infrequent, and then they become more frequent contractions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
They become more intense.
Yes.
Ellen White used those words too, that the natural disasters. And she talked about the fires and the earthquakes and the tornadoes and the floods.
Sure.
Becoming more frequent and more intense.
We know all that's true. We know that that's going to happen. I don't want to seem unfeeling, but and I don't want to disrespect or discredit anybody's genuine fear about these things. But I say, bring it on.
Uh-huh.
Bring it on. I'm ready. If we have to go through this, if the birth pangs have to happen before the baby's born, let's get going. Let's get it done. You know what I mean? Let's bat down the hatches, whatever it takes spiritually to deal with it. But I mean, let's go. I'm not looking for anything to slow down. I want it to speed up. Sorry, that may be selfish.
It's going fast enough already.
So we can remark about it and we can be afraid about it, but we can also be kind of cheerful about it too. And let me tell you, you will never preach a more powerful sermon than if you display confidence and cheerfulness in a world that's falling apart from fear. They will want to know what makes you tick.
Loving and lovable Christian.
Loving and lovable, with faith in God and confidence that God knows what he's doing and the planet is still going to be following its maker. So, anyway, with that, oh, yes, sister, go ahead. In the back.
Thank you for such a wonderful presentation. One thing that you said
Yes.
really resonates with me and made a light go on.
What's that?
And it was when you were giving the definition of God's wrath.
Yes.
And you said it is when he acknowledges your request and steps back.
Yes.
He pulls back, everything decays. And then I thought a light went on. It made me think about, oh my gosh, he is the truth, is the light, and he's the way. So if he pulls back, there is no light.
There's no light, just confusion.
So that was the light that went on, and I want to thank you for that.
Oh, praise the Lord. But that would be him that said that. Trust me, if I make any sense, it's strictly God's grace. Strictly God's grace. Thank you for sharing that. Let's pray and ask God to be with us. And afterwards, to the extent you want to come up and visit with me and see these things, love to have you. Otherwise, we want you to have a great Sabbath day. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for being with us. We talked about some deep things, talked about some light things, but some heavy things as well. Heavenly Father, above all, as all these evidence of creation and the flood and the way you've worked through the history of this world and of our own lives, we think of the things you've done. My goodness, Lord, what a privilege it is to know you. What a privilege it is to sit here in your house and talk about things that give us faith and strengthen us as we look at the future. What a privilege, Lord, to know that despite the world appearing to be falling apart, in fact, you are making sure that things get to the conclusion you want it to. And Lord, I know that includes for all of us to be there with you in the end. So Lord, may that day happen. May it come soon. Give us the strength and the faith we need to make it through those days. And whatever comes our way, Lord, give us what we need. And thank you for hearing our prayer today. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.